The wind howled across the Golden Gate Bridge, sharp and cold, slicing through Elias Carter's thin jacket as he stood trembling at the edge. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white, the icy metal grounding him to a world he no longer wanted. Below, the San Francisco Bay churned, dark and endless, whispering promises of escape. Elias was 25, but the weight of his life made him feel decades older. Born in a small Ohio town, he'd fled to San Francisco 3 years ago, chasing freedom, chasing himself. He'd always known he was different. His heart had stirred for boys in high school, a secret he buried under forced smiles and football games. Coming out at 19 had been like stepping into sunlight, but the warmth didn't last. His family's rejection was swift. His father's silence, his mother's tears, and a suitcase packed with "Don't come back." San Francisco was supposed to be his haven, a city where love was love, where he could be Elias unapologetically. But the city had its own cruelties, sky-high rent, fleeting jobs, and a loneliness that gnawed deeper than any small-town scorn. Tonight, that loneliness had driven him here. His latest job, a barista gig at a trendy Mission District cafe, ended when the owner downsized. His roommate, fed up with late rent, had kicked him out. And then there was Jamie, the artist he'd loved fiercely for 6 months, who'd left with a note. "I'm not ready for this. Sorry." Elias had nothing left. No money, no home, no hope. The bridge, looming in his mind for weeks, felt like the only answer. He leaned forward, the wind tugging at his hair, his breath hitching. One step, that's all it would take. His heart pounded, not with fear but with a strange, hollow calm. "Hey man, you okay?" A voice cut through the wind, warm and steady. Elias froze, his fingers tightening on the railing. He turned his head slightly, catching sight of a cyclist in a bright blue jacket, his bike propped against the railing a few feet away. The man was about 30, with curly blonde hair peeking from under a helmet and eyes that held a quiet intensity. He stood at a careful distance, hands raised slightly, like he was approaching a startled animal. "I'm fine," Elias muttered, his voice hoarse, barely audible over the wind. He turned back to the water, hoping the stranger would leave. "You don't look fine," the man said, softer now, stepping closer but not too close. "I'm Theo. What's your name?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't want a name, didn't want to be seen. He just wanted the water, the quiet, the end. But Theo didn't move. He stood there, his bike a silent witness, the bridge stretching endlessly behind him. "I've been here before," Theo said, his voice steady but laced with something raw. "Not this exact spot, maybe, but close. I know what it feels like when the world's too heavy." Elias's grip faltered, his eyes flicking to Theo despite himself. The man's face was open, unguarded, like he just ripped a page from his own story and offered it up. Elias didn't want to care, but something in Theo's voice, a crack of vulnerability, hooked him. "What do you want?" Elias snapped, his voice sharper than he meant. "Just go." Theo shook his head, a small, stubborn smile tugging at his lips. "Not going anywhere. Not until you tell me your name." Elias glared, but Theo's eyes didn't waver. They were green, flecked with gold, and they held Elias like a lifeline. He felt a spark of anger, at Theo, at himself, at the world for not letting him disappear quietly. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. A flicker of curiosity. Why was this stranger here? Why did he care? "Elias," he said finally, the words slipping out like a surrender. Theo's smile widened, just a fraction. Elias. Good name. You from around here? Elias didn't answer, but Theo didn't seem to mind. He leaned against the railing, casual but alert, like he was settling in for a long conversation. I'm from Seattle originally, Theo said, unprompted. Moved here 5 years ago. I'm a physical therapist, mostly work with kids. Love it, but man, it's exhausting sometimes. You ever feel like the world's just too much? Elias's throat tightened. He wanted to tell Theo to shut up, to leave him alone, but the words wouldn't come. Theo's voice was like a tether, pulling him back from the edge, inch by inch. He didn't know why, but he let Theo keep talking about his job, his dog named Luna, the way San Francisco's fog made him feel like he was living in a dream. It was mundane, almost absurdly so, but it was real. And Elias, for the first time in hours, felt the ground beneath his feet. Theo paused, glancing at Elias. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving you alone out here. Okay? Elias's eyes stung, the wind blurring his vision. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded, barely. Theo nodded back, like they'd made a pact. The bay stretched out below, still dark, still vast, but its pull felt weaker now. Elias didn't know if he was grateful or angry, but he stayed where he was, the railing cold under his hands, Theo's presence warm at his side. The sun dipped lower, painting the bridge in hues of gold and orange. Elias's heart still raced, but it wasn't just despair now. It was something else, something fragile like the first breath after a long dive. Theo didn't push, didn't ask questions. He just stayed, his bike a quiet sentinel, his voice a steady hum against the wind. Elias didn't step back from the edge yet, but he didn't let go either. And for now, that was enough. The wind softened as the sun sank, casting long shadows across the Golden Gate Bridge. Elias's hands ached from gripping the railing, but he hadn't moved. Theo stood a few feet away, his bike still propped up, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos of Elias's mind. You ever ride across this bridge? Theo asked, breaking the silence. His tone was light, like he was asking about the weather, but his eyes stayed sharp, watching Elias carefully. Elias shook his head, barely. He didn't trust his voice yet. His throat felt raw, like he'd been screaming for hours, though he hadn't said more than a few words. It's wild, Theo continued, leaning back against the railing, his helmet now tucked under his arm. First time I did it, I thought I'd get blown right off. But there's something about it, the view, the air. Makes you feel alive, you know? Alive. The word hit Elias like a punch. He didn't feel alive. He felt like a ghost, drifting through a city that didn't want him. But Theo's voice, steady and warm, kept pulling him back, like a lighthouse in a storm. Theo didn't wait for a response. He started talking about the kids he worked with, how a 10-year-old named Mia had beaten him at arm wrestling last week, how a boy named Javier painted him a picture of a lopsided dog. Kids are resilient, Theo said, his voice softening. They've got this way of finding light, even when things are dark. I learn from them every day. Elias's grip on the railing loosened, just a fraction. He didn't know why Theo's stories mattered, but they did. They were small, human, real. They made the world feel less like a void. You don't have to tell me anything, Theo said, glancing at Elias. But if you want to, I'm listening. Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to push Theo away, to tell him to mind his own business, but the words stuck. Instead, he found himself saying, I don't belong here. Theo tilted his head, his expression soft but curious. Here like San Francisco? Or here like he gestured vaguely at the bridge, the water below. Anywhere, Elias said, his voice breaking. I thought this city would be different. I thought I could be me. But it's just the same. People leave. Jobs disappear. I'm just tired. Theo nodded like he understood, though Elias wasn't sure how he could. San Francisco's a tough place, Theo said. It's beautiful, sure, but it chews people up. I've seen it. I felt it. But you're still here, Elias. That's something. Elias laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Yeah, barely. Barely's enough, Theo said, his voice firm. Barely means you're fighting. Elias didn't know what to say to that. He looked at Theo, really looked at him for the first time. The man's face was weathered, not from age but from life. Faint lines around his eyes, a scar above his eyebrow. He wasn't polished or perfect, but there was a warmth to him, a steadiness that made Elias's world feel less like it was spinning out of control. Theo pulled a water bottle from his backpack and offered it to Elias. You look like you could use this. Elias hesitated, then took it, the plastic cool against his palm. He sipped, the water grounding him further. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice low. You don't know me. Theo shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. I don't know. Maybe because I've been where you are. Maybe because I believe in second chances. Or maybe I just don't like riding past someone who looks like they need a friend. Elias's eyes burned, and he looked away, focusing on the water below. It didn't seem as inviting now, not with Theo standing there, not with the weight of his words settling in. He didn't know if he believed in second chances, but for the first time in months he wanted to. Come on, Theo said, straightening up. Let's walk, just to the end of the bridge. You don't have to say anything, just walk with me. Elias wanted to refuse, to stay rooted to the spot, but his feet moved before his mind could catch up. He let go of the railing, his hands trembling, and took a step toward Theo. The cyclist grinned, like Elias had just done something monumental, and pushed his bike alongside him. They walked in silence, the bridge stretching out before them, the city's skyline glowing in the distance. Elias's heart still raced, but it wasn't just fear now. It was something else, something small, fragile, and new. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. The Golden Gate Bridge hummed with the occasional car, but the pedestrian path felt like a world apart. Elias walked beside Theo, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, each step a small rebellion against the pull of the water. Theo pushed his bike, the wheels clicking softly, a steady rhythm that matched the fading pulse of Elias's panic. They reached a bench halfway across the bridge, and Theo gestured to it. "Wanna sit for a sec?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. He sank onto the bench, the wood cool against his legs. Theo parked his bike and sat beside him, leaving enough space to feel respectful but close enough to feel present. The bay stretched out before them, the lights of San Francisco twinkling like stars against the dusk. "You don't have to tell me what's going on," Theo said, his voice low. "But I'm guessing it's more than a bad day." Elias stared at his hands, clasped tightly in his lap. He didn't want to talk, but Theo's quiet patience was like a key, unlocking something he'd kept buried. "I came here to be free," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "To be who I am, gay, out, proud, all that. But it's not like the movies. It's hard. And I'm not enough." Theo's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his green eyes steady, like he was holding space for Elias's pain. "My family disowned me," Elias continued, the words spilling out now. My boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, left me. I lost my job, my apartment. I got nothing, Theo. Nothing. I thought I could make it here, but I was wrong. Theo leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon. That's a lot, he said after a moment. More than anyone should carry alone. Elias laughed, sharp and bitter. Yeah, well, I don't have anyone. That's the point. You've got me, Theo said simply, turning to meet Elias's eyes. I know I'm just some random guy on a bike, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere until you're okay. Elias's throat tightened, and he looked away, blinking hard. He didn't understand why Theo cared, but the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. It made Elias feel seen, in a way he hadn't in years. Theo reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to reveal pages filled with sketches. Kids, dogs, cityscapes. I draw when I'm stressed, he said almost sheepishly. Helps me process stuff. You ever try it? Elias shook his head. I'm not an artist. Doesn't matter, Theo said, tearing out a blank page and handing it to Elias with a pencil. Just doodle. Anything. It's not about being good. It's about getting it out. Elias took the pencil, his fingers unsteady. He stared at the blank page, then scribbled a jagged line, then another. It wasn't art, but it felt something. Like a release, small but real. Theo watched, not judging, just present. You know, Theo said after a while, I came out when I was 22, thought it'd be this big, liberating moment. And it was for a bit. But then came the hard stuff. Friends who ghosted me. Jobs I didn't get because I was too open. I get it, Elias. The world's not as kind as it should be. Elias looked up, surprised. Theo was gay? He hadn't assumed, hadn't even thought about it. But now it made sense, the way Theo seemed to understand, the way he didn't flinch at Elias's story. It gets better, Theo said, his voice soft but firm. Not perfect, but better. You just gotta hold on long enough to see it. Elias wanted to believe him, but the weight of his losses still pressed down. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice breaking. Theo reached out, hesitating before placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. One step at a time. You're already doing it. You're here talking to me. That's a start. The touch was gentle, grounding. Elias didn't pull away. He looked at the notebook in his lap, the messy lines staring back at him. They weren't much, but they were his. And for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. The city lights glowed brighter now, the bridge a quiet sentinel around them. Elias didn't know what came next, but with Theo beside him, the future felt less like a void and more like a question. One he might, just might, want to answer. The sky darkened, the last streaks of orange fading into deep blue. Elias and Theo sat on the bench, the Golden Gate Bridge stretching endlessly around them. The notebook lay in Elias's lap, its scribbled lines a small testament to a moment he hadn't expected to survive. Theo stretched, his bike leaning against the bench like a loyal companion. You hungry? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes still watchful. Elias shook his head, though his stomach growled in betrayal. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, too consumed by despair to care. Theo raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, and dug into his backpack, pulling out a granola bar. Here. It's not gourmet, but it's something. Elias took it, the wrapper crinkling in his hands. He tore it open and took a bite, the sweetness grounding him further. Thanks, he mumbled, his voice still rough. Theo grinned. Anytime. So, what's your story, Elias? Before all this, What did you love? The question caught Elias off guard. Love? He hadn't thought about love in a long time. Not the kind Theo meant. Anyway. I used to write, he said finally. Poetry, mostly. Back in Ohio. It was the only way I could make sense of things. Theo's eyes lit up. Poetry? That's cool. You ever share it? Elias snorted. No. It was just for me. Stupid stuff, probably. Nothing stupid if it means something to you, Theo said, his voice firm. You should write again. Bet you've got stories to tell. Elias looked away, the idea both tempting and terrifying. Writing had been his refuge once, but he'd abandoned it in San Francisco, too busy surviving to dream. Theo's words stirred something, though. A spark he thought had died. They sat in silence for a while, the city's hum a distant soundtrack. Elias finished the granola bar, the small act of eating feeling like a victory. Theo pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos, showing Elias one of Luna, his golden retriever, mid-leap at a park. She's my therapist, Theo joked. Better than any human. Elias managed a small smile, the first in days. She's cute. She's a menace, Theo corrected. But his grin was fond. You got any pets? Nah, Elias said. Couldn't afford one. Barely afford myself. Theo nodded, not pitying but understanding. Fair. But if you ever need a dog fix, Luna's always up for new friends. Elias didn't know how to respond to that, to the idea of a future where he might meet Theo's dog, might meet Theo again. The thought was overwhelming, but not in a bad way. It was like stepping into a room he hadn't known existed. Theo glanced at his watch. It's getting late. You got a place to crash tonight. Elias's stomach dropped. He didn't. His roommate's ultimatum had left him with a backpack and nowhere to go. He shook his head, shame creeping in. Theo didn't flinch. Okay, my place isn't far and I've got a couch. No pressure, but you're welcome to it. Just for tonight, till you figure things out. Elias stared at him, suspicion warring with gratitude. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Theo shrugged, his smile soft. I know enough. You're Elias, you write poetry, and you're fighting like hell to keep going. That's enough for me. Elias's eyes burned again, and he looked away, the city lights blurring. He didn't trust easily, not after Jamie, not after his family, but Theo's offer felt different. Not charity, not pity, but something human, something real. Okay, Elias said finally, his voice barely audible. Just for tonight. Theo's grin was like sunlight. Deal. Let's get off this bridge. They stood, Theo grabbing his bike, Elias clutching the notebook Theo had given him. The walk to the end of the bridge felt different now. Not a retreat, but a step forward. The city waited beyond, vast and unforgiving. But with Theo beside him, Elias felt a flicker of courage. Not enough to conquer the world, but enough to keep walking. The streets of San Francisco buzzed with evening life as Elias followed Theo, the cyclist weaving through pedestrians with ease. Elias's backpack felt heavier now, not from its contents but from the weight of the choice he'd made. To walk away from the bridge, to follow a stranger into the unknown. Theo's apartment was in the Castro, a vibrant neighborhood where rainbow flags fluttered on every corner, a stark contrast to the gray fog of Elias's mind. Theo's place was small but warm, a one-bedroom filled with mismatched furniture and books stacked haphazardly on shelves. Luna greeted them with a wagging tail and a joyful bark, her golden fur glowing under the soft light of a floor lamp. Elias knelt to pet her, her warmth easing the knot in his chest. Make yourself at home, Theo said, tossing his helmet onto a chair. Couch is over there. I'll grab some blankets. Elias sat, the couch creaking under him. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dog, a lived-in scent that felt foreign after weeks of instability. He clutched the notebook Theo had given him, its blank pages both a challenge and a comfort. Theo returned with a pile of blankets and a pillow, setting them on the couch. You want tea? I'm making some. Sure, Elias said, surprised by how normal it felt to say yes. Theo moved to the kitchen, humming softly, and Elias watched him, trying to make sense of this man who'd pulled him back from the edge. Over tea, Theo shared more about himself, not a flood, just pieces. He'd grown up in Seattle, raised by a single mom who'd supported his coming out but struggled to understand it. He'd moved to San Francisco for a fresh start, found purpose in helping kids recover from injuries, found joy in small things like cycling and sketching. Life's messy, he said, stirring his tea. But it's worth it, you know? Elias sipped his tea, the warmth spreading through him. I don't know if I believe that. Theo nodded, not arguing. That's okay. You don't have to believe it yet. Just keep showing up. Elias didn't know how to do that, but Theo's words stayed with him, like a seed planted in barren soil. They talked late into the night, about nothing and everything. Music, movies, the way San Francisco's hills made your legs burn. Elias found himself laughing, a small, rusty sound, when Theo described Luna stealing an entire pizza off the counter. When Theo finally yawned and headed to bed, Elias lay on the couch, Luna curled up nearby. The city hummed outside, a reminder of the world he'd almost left. He opened the notebook, the pencil heavy in his hand, and wrote a single line. I'm still here. It wasn't poetry, not yet, but it was a start. The next morning, Theo made coffee, and they sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window. So, Theo said, his tone light but serious, what's next for you? Elias froze, the question too big. I don't know, he admitted. I don't have a job, a place, anything. Theo leaned back, thoughtful. Okay, let's start small. You need a job? I know a guy who runs a bookstore in No Valley. He's always looking for help. I can make a call. Elias blinked, caught off guard. Why would you do that? Because I believe in you, Theo said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. And because I've been where you are. Someone helped me once. I'm just paying it forward. Elias didn't know what to say. The idea of someone believing in him felt foreign, but it sparked something, a tiny flame of possibility. He nodded, and Theo grinned, pulling out his phone to make the call. By noon, Elias had a job interview lined up at the bookstore. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a step. And with Theo's number saved in his phone, the world felt a little less heavy. Weeks passed, and Elias found a rhythm, fragile but real. The bookstore job in No Valley wasn't glamorous. Stocking shelves, ringing up customers, but it was steady. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Leo, didn't ask questions about Elias's past, just handed him a schedule and a stack of books to sort. Each paycheck felt like a small victory, a brick in the foundation of a life he was rebuilding. Theo became a constant, not overwhelming but present. They met for coffee, walked Luna through Dolores Park, talked about everything from politics to the best taco trucks. Theo never pushed, but his quiet support was like a lifeline, pulling Elias further from the edge he'd stood on. One evening, at a small Castro cafe, Elias opened up more than he ever had. I was so sure that night, he said, stirring his latte. I thought the bridge was it, the end. But you changed that. Theo's eyes softened, but he didn't deflect the weight of Elias's words. "You changed it, Elias. I just gave you a nudge." Elias shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "More than a nudge. You saw me, really saw me. I didn't think anyone could." Theo reached across the table, his hand brushing Elias's, a fleeting but intentional touch. "You're worth seeing," he said simply. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Elias's heart raced, not with fear but with something new, something warm and terrifying and alive. He didn't know if he was ready for it, but he wanted to be. Months later, Elias stood on the Golden Gate Bridge again, this time with Theo and Luna. It was a clear day, the bay sparkling, the city alive with color. Elias held a notebook, filled now with poems, raw, honest. He'd started sharing them at open mics, his voice shaky but growing stronger. Theo nudged him, grinning. "You ever gonna write a poem about me?" Elias laughed, the sound free and light. "Maybe, if you're lucky." They walked across the bridge, Luna trotting ahead, the wind carrying the promise of spring. Elias looked at the water below, not with longing but with gratitude. He'd nearly lost himself here, but someone had stopped, someone had cared, and in that moment he'd found a reason to keep going. The note on the bench was still there, faded but clear. "Love is love, keep going." Elias smiled, his hand brushing Theo's as they walked. The world wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He was enough, and for the first time in years he believed it.